Hey everyone, this is another video on presentation on John Donne. John Donne is a very famous poet of English literature, and the points we will cover in this video is like this. First of all, introduction. Next is what is metaphysical concepts. Third is physical concepts in Good Morrow. Good Morrow is a poem by John Donne. Next is features of Donne's love poetries. Next is variety of moods in his poetry, and at last characteristics of Donne's poetries. So this is a long video, and the first one is about introduction. John Donne was born in 1572. His name was pronounced as if spelt Dunn and was humorously Latinized as Jonas Factus. His father was an iron monger, and his mother was a daughter of John Howard. Dunn's mother was a Roman Catholic, and his son was brought up on the principles of the old faith. He lost his father at the age of 5. He did not take any degree either at Oxford or at Cambridge, where he later shifted in 1592. Means in Cambridge he shifted in 1592. He entered Lincoln's Inn. He appears to have been already a member of Thavis Inn. He did not seriously pursue his legal studies. He was rather busy writing works for John Benson, who says he had written all his best pieces when he was 25 years old. He started writing in 1590, lived through the Jacobean age. He is connecting link between the Elizabethan age and Puritan age, the age of Donne comprising the last decade of 16th century and the early decades of the 17th century, is therefore an age of transition. By this time, the Renaissance impulse has exhausted itself. The Elizabethan zest for life is gone. Poetry is an inner thought and also an art, is neither philosophy nor science, neither idealism nor agnosticism. It is an attempt to solve the existential problems by the means or of a living synthesis. Donne can be singled out as a poet who has been most controversial during his own times, of whom's reputation suffered periodical eclipses in after age. Donne speaks of two worlds: the disintegrating medieval world of scholastic philosophy, science, and the rising world of the new philosophy. Donne's reputation as a love poet rests in his 55 lyrics, which were written at different periods of his life but were published for the first time in 1633 in one volume and is called Songs and Sonnets. Donne's love poems cover a wide range of feelings, from extreme physical passion to spiritual love. His greatness as a love poet arises from that as poetry covers a wider range of emotions than that of any previous poet, and it is not bookish but is rooted in his personal experience. His love experiences were wide and varied, and so is the emotional range of his love poetry. He had love affairs with a number of women, some of them lasting and permanent, others only of a short duration. Each poem deals with a love situation which is intellectually analyzed with the skill of an experienced lawyer. Donne is realistic enough to realize that love, to be a satisfying passion, must be a mutual relationship. Donne's treatment of love is both sensuous and realistic. He does not completely reject the pleasure of the body, even in the poems where love is treated as the highest spiritual passion. This emphasis on the claims of the body is another feature which distinguishes Donne from the poet, both of the patriarchal and Platonic school. So, love merely of the body is not love but lust. But he is realistic enough to realize that it cannot also be of this soul alone. It must be both of the soul and the body. It is the both which brings the soul together, and so the claims of the body must not be ignored. Neither does Donne accept the contemporary view that marriage only alone sanctifies the sexual act, nor the medieval view that the sex is alike sinful with is or without the marriage bond. According to his views, that sex is alike sinful within or the purity or otherwise of the sexual act depends on the quality of the relation between the lovers. So, now we will move on to what is conceit. So, what is metaphysical conceits? The poem The Good Morrow is a characteristic affectionate love poem by John Donne, and the poem uncover his genius as a metaphysical poet. The central theme of the poem is loving concerns towards beloved, its depth and devotion. It celebrates the happy, satisfied love that has its own in diversity. The oath of love between the poet and his beloved is so unique and simple that the poet thinks that he and his lady love has possessed their own realm. Although lovers are hunted by neither awe nor distrust, devoted and mutually trustful, love in fact dominates the happy pleasures of life and love. The poet John Donne and his beloved are so delighted in their mutual love for each other that they are linked um, in the poem as two hemispheres. Their love conquest overall worldly mutability and mortality. They are so closely attached to each other that none can be separated and no one has the power to kill their love. Next is metaphysical concepts in Good Morrow. As I have told you that Good Morrow is a very famous poem by the famous poet John Donne. So here is the metaphysical concepts of Good Morrow. John Donne's conceits are particularly striking, and in the poem Good Morrow, there are many unique conceits are found in the poem. The first significant metaphysical conceit is found in the first stanza of the poem. Here is the poet compare him and his beloved's consciousness with the metaphysical seven sleepers Dan. John Donne wanted to convey the fact that the way as seven Christian youth once upon a time had hidden them slaves inside a cave and slept there for almost 3 centuries. In the same way, he and his beloved remains unconscious about their love. Again, another wonderful metaphysical conceit we found where the poet compares his own private world with the world around. Donne never cares about the external consequences of the world where whether he always happy processing his own private world along his beloved. And finally, in the poem John Donne has used the most original and brilliant metaphysical conceit where the poet compares him and his beloved to two hemispheres. Their love is so intense and so strong that they two forms one perfect whole. These are the luminous metaphysical concepts found in the poem Good Morrow. Next slide is about features of Donne's love poetry. So several features are there in Donne's poetry which separate him from common poets to his era of his era. So he has a poet of realism. Therefore, every poem narrates the personality and autobiography of the poet. It is obvious to us that he has broken the convention and has used a variety of poetic devices. Conceits and hyperboles are remarkable in this regard. In addition to it, the chief characteristic of John Donne's love poetry are as under. So there are basically three strains in the poetry of John Donne, which are cynically strain, conjugal love strain, and last is Platonic strain. So first is cynical strain makes Donne a good love poet. As a love poet, John Donne demonstrates three strains in his love poems. First and the foremost among them is the cynical strain. Nonetheless, his cynicism is always related to women's unfaithfulness. For instance, in Go and Catch a Falling Star, he gives argument after argument to prove that loyalty is very rare in women. One cannot find the faithful girl. If after doing hard efforts he finds her, then it would have been changed until the person reaches her. John Donne may have experienced life from a wide angle, but the truth is his experiences are only related to the love relationships. When his relationship does not do more or his beloved betrays him, he becomes cynical. Thereby, cynicism is an important strain in the love poetry of John Donne. I hope you have understood this. Next is conjugal love strain. So, John Donne finds peace and harmony in love. He sees it as a passion instead of nasty work. Numerous poems by Donne depicts this strain. For example, Valediction of Weeping and Valediction Forbidden Mourning are about spiritual peace. As a poet, as a love poet, John Donne has proved that love is part of life and that without it, life is barren and useless. Whenever he remembers his beloved, he attains peace and serenity. He cannot forget her and the moments that he has spent with her. Thus, bundles of poems contain the conjugal love strain. Next and the last is Platonic strain. It is the last but the most important love strain. Love is love whether it is before marriage or after. There is always spirituality in it. Donne has improved this strain and written divine poems to exemplify. In the sun rising, the poet considers love as the best thing on this planet. Similarly, in canonization, he takes love as a holy passion. Hence, this strain is entirely the opposite of the cynical strain. Next, we will study about variety of moods in Donne's poetry. So one by one we will cover all these points. First is John Donne as love poet of realism. Conventional poems were not original. They were about fairies and too copied from the languages. John Donne and Ben Jonson were against the tradition. They wrote poetry which was based on reality. Donne's poetry is also the most realistic. As Matt mentioned earlier, he expresses his deep love experiences, therefore, his poetry is actually his biography. Realism is one of the prominent factors which makes John Donne a memorable love poet. Next is no depiction of female beauty. Donne might talk about women, but he never praised their beauty. He never said that he liked the hairs or lips of his beloved. He is a love devotee and talks about emotions, not physical appearances. For him, love is not just about sex. If he talks about any part of his her beloved's body, then he merely describes its charm. Moreover, in his eyes, physical contact is not necessary for love. This very fact is evident from Valediction, Forbidden Mourning. It is desirous and spiritual. In this regard, John Donne is different from the second best love poet of his era. Next is love limited philosophy. So Donne's philosophy is limited to love. He has covered only this topic in his poems. Only love poems of John Donne is not limited to the philosophy of love, but divine poems are also about it. However, in those poems, love is for Christ and God. In love poems, it is typically between him and his wife Annie More. Thus, he has no worldly philosophy. He never touched politics or any other social issue of his society, nor does he mention any sophisticated philosophy in his poems. He is the best in one and only one topic, that is love. His approach in this regard is Platonic and patriarchal, where love for the body is not considered love but lust. Pure love is of the soul. Thus, it is another trait of John Donne which makes him overall best love poet. Next is variety of emotions. Songs and the sonnets are all about emotions. What makes him the best poet of every century is his wide range of emotions. No previous writer or poet has such a long list of emotions as Donne has. So, the list of his love affairs is also long. He has spent time with many women. Some relations were temporary, whereas some were everlasting. What he experienced, he expressed in form of poetry. Therefore, every line, each word, and every single poem of John Donne is full of emotions. Hence, this capability of John Donne also separates him from the masses and helps him to gain the title of the best love poet. Next is womanhood describes Donne as love poet. Donne's world might be limited to one woman, yet his attitude towards women is different in every poem. Somewhere they are loyal, whereas somewhere they are unfaithful. C.S. Lewis summarizes Donne's attitude towards women in the following lines: contempt for women is the dominant note of Donne's love poetry. Next is characteristics of John Donne's love poetries or John Donne's poetry. So, one by one, we will study all these points. First is belittling cosmic forces. Donne's poetry sometimes seems to relish in belittling great or cosmic forces. Death be not proud, for example, shows how the poet feels about death. It is to be neither lauded nor feared, as it is simply the gateway to another life. The sun's rising denigrates the sun as simply a laser light compared to his lover, and their love is portrayed as more important than the whole world. These extravagant takedowns are in keeping with his extreme comparisons and sometimes strange metaphors. In so many things, Donne work pushes the boundaries of the comparison and logic, creating poetic figures that are unique and memorable. Next is religion. A great deal of Donne's poetry is exclusively divine, and even the more secular poems often contain a heavy dose of religious thought and meaning. Donne saw his creator as central to his world, and thus he had no good reason to escape the influence of the divine on his work. His love poetry moves from physical attraction to spiritual unity most of the time. To Donne, religion was not a separate part of his life but the well springs from which one's everyday drew sustenance. Next is death and hereafter. Death is a common image in Donne's poetry. However, for Donne, death is not so much a somber subject producing gloomy thoughts, but a transition moment, often a climax, denoting a change of state in the flea. For example, the women killing to the flea ostensibly ruins argument for their physical intimacy, but from the death he has able to form a positive proof that their union would not have any greater effect than the loss of the blood she has just obliterated. In a valediction forbidden mourning, Donne refers to his impending departure and absence from his wife as a form of death, suggesting that his separation from her is a form of emotional obliteration. Although he states that the physical distance cannot alter their ubiquitous love. So, next slide we will study about is love as both physical and spiritual. So, Donne equates physical love and spiritual love in many of his works to this, and Donne often suggests that the love he has for a particular beloved in a particular poem is superior so that of the other's lovers. In Donne, loving someone is as much as religious experience as a physical one. His love transcends mere physicality, and thus it is of a higher order than that of more mundane lovers. In love's uh, infiniteness, for example, Donne begins with a tradition sounding love poem, but by the third stanza, the lover has transformed the love between himself and his beloved into an abstract ideal which can be possessed absolutely and completely. Next is interconnectedness of humanity. One of the Don's most famous statement, no man is an island complete unto himself, directs his readers to an often overlooked aspect of Donne's metaphysical thinking. He sees every man and woman as spirituality interrelated, nothing that the death of one person affects every other. A death quickly affects the diseased circle of friends, family, and acquaintances, and it is generally felt by the majority of humanity, even those who had no personal interaction with the deceased. So, just as grains of sand that have eroded from the shores of Europe diminish the continent's land mass, however, infinitesimally, the life and the death of an individual affect the rest of humanity in the larger scope of the world. Next is fidelity. So, writers in Donne's time often expressed negative views of women, and some of Donne's poems seems to express such views with biting force. One corollary to seeing divine and physical love as coming forth from the same source is the almost obsessive focus of fidelity in Donne's work. At last is conclusion. So he is considered the preeminent representative of the metaphysical poets. His poetical works are noted for their metaphysical and sensuous style and includes sonnets, love poems, religious poems, and Latin translations, epigrams, elegies, songs, and satires. So, see how long, how vast his area is. So, he is also known as his for his sermons also. So, this is all about today. Thank you for now, and bye to all.